The black SUV screeched across the wet pavement and stopped so violently that one of its doors flew open before the engine even died. A woman stumbled out, barefoot, breathing hard. Her white dress was stained with mud and rain, and the diamond on her finger flashed under the flickering security lights like a warning sign. She turned her head sharply, looking behind her as if death itself was chasing her. And then she ran. "Stop her!" a man shouted from inside the car. She didn't stop. She sprinted toward the glowing entrance of Hanul Group's headquarters, her body shaking, her chest rising and falling so fast it looked painful. A tall man standing under the building looked up. His face changed instantly. "Judy!" Joon-seo ran toward her. She crashed into him so hard he nearly lost his balance, and for one split second, his arms wrapped around her like he thought he had just gotten his wife back. She looked up at him, trembling. Rain dripped from her lashes. Her lips parted. And then she smiled. Not like a woman who had just escaped. Not like a woman who had been saved. But like a woman who had just won. And if that smile doesn't scare you, then trust me, you're not ready for what this woman did. 2 years earlier, Joon-seo was the kind of man who made silence feel expensive. At 32, he was the acting CEO of Hanul Group, one of Korea's fastest-growing luxury tech empires, a company built on elegance, exclusivity, and enough old money to make even politicians bow a little lower. He was brilliant, cold, and rich in the kind of way that made people forgive his personality. But despite the success, the private jets, and the polished magazine covers, his board had one problem with him. He was unmarried, and in their world, that wasn't a personal choice. That was a liability. A stable company needs a stable image, one elderly board member said during a private meeting, his wrinkled fingers tapping the conference table like he was summoning obedience. Investors trust men with families. Joon-seo didn't even look up from the report in his hand. Investors should trust numbers. They trust optics first. Another board member leaned in. The markets are nervous. The recent scandal didn't help. You need to look settled. Joon-seo finally raised his eyes, and his stare alone could have lowered the room temperature. "So your solution," he said flatly, "is marriage." "It is not a solution," the chairman replied. "It is strategy." Joon-seo hated strategy when it involved his personal life, but he hated losing control more. And that was how a week later, in a private lounge above one of Seoul's most elite hotels, he found himself sitting across from a woman who didn't look remotely intimidated by him. Judy Koso sat with one leg crossed over the other, reading a contract that would legally make her his wife. "Welcome to Soarweave TV. Tell me what time you are watching this and where you are watching from. Enjoy this masterpiece and don't forget to like and subscribe." She wore black. Simple. Elegant. Sharp. No flashy jewelry. No desperate energy. No nervous fidgeting. Just stillness. And somehow, that unsettled him more than if she had begged for the opportunity. He watched her turn another page. "You've been reading for 10 minutes, he said. She didn't look up. That tends to happen when people want to avoid signing their lives away too quickly. His mouth almost twitched. Almost. It's a contract marriage, not a hostage negotiation. That made her look up. And when she did, her eyes held his for just a little too long. "That depends," she said softly, "on who's actually trapped." Yeah, she had his attention. Joon-seo leaned back in his seat, studying her properly now. Judy Koso was British-Nigerian, highly educated, discreetly well-connected, and recently brought into Seoul's luxury branding world through international consulting. Her image was clean. Her reputation was polished. No scandals. No visible family drama. No public romantic ties. In other words, she was perfect. On paper. In person, she was dangerous. Not because she was loud, because she was calm. And calm people usually knew exactly what they were doing. She placed the contract on the table between them. 2 years, she said. Public marriage. Private independence. No children. No emotional obligations. At the end, a quiet divorce and a financial settlement. That's correct. She tilted her head slightly. And you really think this is sustainable? Yes. You say that like you've never met a human being before. He didn't answer. She smiled faintly. And that was the first mistake. Because the moment she smiled, She changed the energy in the room. Not softer. Worse. More interesting. What if one of us falls in love? She asked. Joon-seo's expression didn't move. That won't happen. She stared at him for a beat. Then she picked up the pen and signed. Just like that. No hesitation. No negotiation. No dramatic pause. And that should have been the first warning. Because women don't casually agree to marry emotionally unavailable billionaires unless they want something big. If you're already suspicious of her, go ahead and drop it in the comments now, because trust me, this woman did not enter that marriage innocently. Their wedding happened exactly 12 days later. Private enough to feel exclusive. Public enough to make headlines. The photos were beautiful in the most dangerous way possible, the kind of beautiful that lies well. Joon-seo in a black tailored suit. Unreadable as ever. Judy is in ivory silk. Glowing just enough to make every camera fall in love with her. The internet exploded. A mystery bride. A sudden marriage. An international beauty beside Korea's coldest CEO. People had questions. The board had relief. And the shareholders had the illusion they wanted. Inside the marriage, though, reality was much less romantic. The first morning after the wedding, Joon-seo walked into the kitchen of the penthouse and found Judy already sitting at the island in a silk robe, scrolling through her phone while sipping coffee like she'd been living there for years. He stopped. She looked up. "Good morning, husband." He frowned. "Don't call me that." She took another sip. "Touchy. You're in my seat." She looked down at the stool, then back at him. "I had no idea furniture could be emotionally assigned." He stared at her. She smiled. Again. That smile. He moved to the opposite side of the island instead. She watched him for a second. "You really are like this in the morning." "I'm like this all day." "That's unfortunate." He should have been annoyed. Instead, for reasons he didn't understand, he almost laughed. Almost. And that annoyed him even more. The first few weeks of the marriage were awkward in all the wrong ways. They attended events together, smiled for cameras, and played their roles with almost terrifying precision. She learned how to stand beside him without looking ornamental. He learned how to lower his voice slightly when speaking to her in public so people would believe intimacy existed. And it worked. Too well. At one investor dinner, an older woman leaned toward Judy and whispered, "You must be very patient to live with him." Judy smiled sweetly and replied, "You'd be amazed what women can endure for the right compensation." The woman nearly choked on her wine. Joon-seo heard it. He didn't react until they got into the car. Then he turned to her slowly. "You enjoy provoking people." She crossed her legs. "Only the ones who deserve it." "That was unnecessary." "No," she said. "That was efficient." He looked out the window. But this time he was hiding a smile. And just like that, without either of them realizing it yet, the contract marriage started becoming dangerous. Because the one thing neither of them had accounted for was chemistry. And chemistry is how people ruin perfectly good revenge plans. If this marriage already feels like it's about to blow up, make sure you like this video now, because this is only the beginning, and in the next part, things get messy when the husband's charming best friend enters the story, and the sabotage begins. By the third week of the marriage, Seoul had already fallen in love with the illusion of them. Their faces were everywhere. Business magazines called them the power couple redefining modern legacy. Fashion pages obsessed over Judy's elegance. Investors relaxed. The board stopped breathing down Joon-seo's neck. Even the gossip blogs that had first mocked the marriage were now analyzing their body language like unpaid therapists. And somehow the strangest part of it all was that the lie was starting to feel effortless. That should have scared both of them more than it did. The first person to notice it was Kang Min-ho. He entered Joon-seo's office one afternoon without knocking, holding a tablet in one hand and a coffee in the other, looking entirely too amused for someone walking into a crisis meeting. "You know," he said casually, dropping into the chair across from Joon-seo's desk, "it's deeply offensive that your fake marriage has better chemistry than most real ones." Joon-seo didn't even look up from the file in front of him. "Why are you here?" "To support you emotionally." "You've never done that in your life." "Exactly. That's how serious this is." Judy, who had been sitting on the lounge sofa by the window reviewing gala guest lists, let out a laugh before she could stop herself. Minho immediately turned toward her like a man who had just found his favorite audience. Thank you, he said, placing a hand over his heart. At least one person in this building appreciates my suffering. Judy lifted a brow. Suffering? Yes. I've had to watch this man pretend to be human in public for 3 straight weeks. It's traumatizing. Joon-seo finally looked up, unimpressed. You have 30 seconds before I ask security to escort you. Minho grinned. See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. And just like that, he became impossible not to like. That was the problem. Minho had that kind of energy. The warm, easy kind that disarmed people before they realized they'd handed him access. He was Joon-seo's oldest friend, Hanul Group's executive director, and the only man in the company who could insult the CEO to his face and leave the room alive. He was funny when things got too tense, smart when things got too complicated, loyal in the exact way people write novels about. And that made him dangerous. But nobody knew that yet. Not Joon-seo. Not Judy. And definitely not you. That evening, Minho stayed for dinner because apparently boundaries meant nothing to him. Judy was halfway through a plate of grilled fish when Minho looked around the penthouse dining room and sighed dramatically. This place still looks like a luxury prison. Joon-seo took a sip of water. Then leave. Minho ignored him and looked at Judy instead. How are you surviving here? She considered the question. I've started moving things. Joon-seo looked up sharply. What things? Decor. Flowers. Lamps. The energy. The energy? Yes, she said calmly. Your house has the emotional warmth of a funeral lobby. Minho choked on his drink laughing. Joon-seo stared at her in disbelief. It is a professionally designed interior. It's a beige threat. Minho slapped the table. Please marry him again. I didn't get enough entertainment the first time. Joon-seo pinched the bridge of his nose. I regret introducing either of you to each other. And there it was again. That almost smile. That tiny crack in his armor that only showed up around them. Judy noticed it. And that should have made her back off. Instead, it made her curious. Later that night, after Minho finally left and the penthouse quieted down, Judy wandered into the living room and stopped. The black lilies that had sat in a crystal vase near the window for weeks were gone. In their place stood yellow tulips. Fresh. Bright. Alive. She turned and found Joon-seo standing a few feet away, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, staring at the flowers like he wasn't sure whether he hated them or not. You changed them, he said. Yes. I liked the black ones. No, she said softly. You liked what they said about you. His eyes shifted to hers. And what do these say? She looked at the tulips for a second, then back at him. That someone still has a pulse. Silence. Dangerous, intimate silence. The kind that stretches too long and says too much. He should have walked away. She should have looked away. Neither of them did. And that was exactly when the first real problem arrived. At 6:14 the next morning, Joon-seo's phone started vibrating nonstop. By 6:20, he was in his home office, tie half done, face dark with fury. By 6:25, Minho was already there. Judy came in just in time to hear the words. Who leaked the prototype files? The room froze. A massive Hanul Group product concept, something months away from launch and worth millions in investor confidence, had somehow appeared on a tech media site overnight. Not the entire file, but enough. Enough to raise questions. Enough to make competitors move. Enough to send the stock into panic if it spread too far. Joon-seo stood behind his desk, one hand braced against the wood so hard his knuckles looked pale. Internal access only, he said coldly. No one outside the executive development chain should have touched that server. Minho's expression had gone serious now, all traces of his usual humor gone. Security's tracing every login point. We'll know more soon. Joon-seo's jaw flexed. That should have happened before this reached the press. Judy stood near the doorway, silent for a moment, then asked, Who benefits? Both men looked at her. She stepped forward. Leaks like this are rarely random. If someone wanted to damage the company, this isn't just theft. It's pressure. Minho gave her a long look. Not suspicious. Interested. Joon-seo crossed his arms. Pressure for what? For leverage, she said. To make you react emotionally. To shake investors. To create the appearance of internal instability. Minho tilted his head slightly. You sound very sure. She met his eyes evenly. I've worked in crisis branding. Sabotage has a pattern. Joon-seo stared at her for a beat longer than necessary, then turned back to the screen. Find out who's behind it. Minho nodded once. Already on it. And that should have been the end of the morning. It wasn't. Because by noon, the media had already moved on to phase 2. Not just the leak. The marriage. A business tabloid dropped an anonymous piece suggesting Han Joon-seo's wedding had been strategically accelerated to distract from internal instability and quiet shareholder discomfort. It was written just vaguely enough to avoid legal action and just specifically enough to do damage. By evening, social media had turned it into a circus. Convenient wife. PR marriage. Imported bride for stock recovery. Judy stared at the comments from her phone in the backseat, while they drove to a formal charity dinner they could no longer cancel. Some were stupid. Some were cruel. Some were very, very familiar. Women in silk dresses and men in expensive suits often wrapped racism in polished language and called it opinion. She locked her phone and looked out the window. Joon-seo noticed. You don't have to come tonight, he said after a while. She turned. And let them think I'm hiding? I said you don't have to. She held his gaze. And I'm saying I'm not weak. That shut him up. The event was elegant on the surface and venomous underneath. People smiled too brightly. Questions lingered too long. Compliments came sharpened. One executive's wife looked Judy up and down and said with a pleasant smile, You've adapted so beautifully. Seoul must feel very different. Judy smiled back. Not as different as some people hoped. The woman's expression twitched. Joon-seo, standing beside her, said nothing. But he heard everything. Later, while he was cornered by investors discussing brand resilience, Judy stepped out onto one of the terrace balconies for air. And that was where she met Choi Dae-hyun. He was leaning against the railing like he'd been waiting for the perfect dramatic entrance, dressed in a charcoal suit, hair swept back, smile polished enough to start a war. He turned as she approached. Mrs. Han. She didn't smile. You know who I am. Everyone does. That sounds exhausting. He laughed softly. I've heard so much about you. She folded her arms. That usually means someone is gossiping. He stepped closer, but not enough to be inappropriate. Just enough to be interesting. Only that you're beautiful, intelligent, and apparently the only woman in Seoul capable of making Han Joon-seo look almost alive. She gave him a flat look. Almost. Let's not get carried away. And despite herself, she nearly laughed. Nearly. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Dae-hyun had the kind of charm that was impossible to trust because it was too well practiced. He was one of Hanul Group's strongest market rivals. A man with just enough money, ego, and audacity to make him irritatingly relevant. And from the moment he looked at her, Judy knew one thing for certain. This man was going to be a problem. The only question was how big. Inside the ballroom, Minho spotted them from across the room and his smile faded for the first time that night. Just for a second. Just enough to matter later. If you're already sensing that this charming rival is not here for peace, hit like now because in the next part, the sabotage gets worse, the chemistry gets dangerous, and one rainy night changes everything. Dae-hyun did not move away when Joon-seo approached. That alone was irritating. Most men, when caught talking too comfortably to another man's wife, had the decency to at least pretend to step back. But Choi Dae-hyun simply turned his head, saw Joon-seo walking toward them across the terrace, and smiled like he'd been waiting for him all evening. Han Joon-seo, he said smoothly. You look thrilled to see me. Joon-seo stopped beside Judy, his expression flat. I'd say the same, but I prefer not to lie in public. Dae-hyun laughed, low and amused. Still charming. Judy could feel the tension immediately, sharp enough to cut glass. Dae-hyun looked between them and shook his head with mock admiration. You two really are beautiful together. Deeply inconvenient for the rest of us. Joon-seo's voice dropped a degree colder. If you have business, call my office. If not, find another balcony. Dae-hyun lifted his hands. Relax. I was only keeping your wife company while your investors tried to swallow you whole. Judy glanced at Joon-seo, waiting for him to say something clipped and territorial. Instead he said, "You don't keep her company. You circle." And that was interesting, because that didn't sound like indifference. That sounded like jealousy. Daehyun's eyes flickered with amusement. Noted. Then he gave Judy a small nod. "I'm sure we'll meet again." "Hopefully not," Joon-seo said. Daehyun grinned. "That usually means yes." He walked away like he owned the night. Joon-seo didn't speak until the terrace door shut behind him. Then he turned to Judy. What did he want? She folded her arms. To flirt mostly. And to be annoying. He's very talented. His jaw tightened. You shouldn't entertain him. That made her blink. Then she let out a short laugh. Excuse me. He's not harmless. And I am what exactly? Fragile. No. Then what is this? She asked, stepping closer. A warning? A command? Jealousy. He looked at her, and for one dangerous second the truth almost showed. Then he shut it down. It's common sense. She stared at him, unimpressed. That's a very boring answer. And she walked past him before he could respond. But that question stayed with both of them. Jealousy. Because once that word enters a contract marriage, things start catching fire very quickly. The next 48 hours were chaos. The prototype leak triggered investor anxiety, and the board started circling Joon-seo again like old men who smelled blood but wanted to call it governance. Internal security teams reviewed server logs. PR teams worked around the clock. Finance tried to calm the markets. Legal sent out warnings and denials. And just when it seemed like things couldn't get worse, they did. A second article dropped. This one anonymous. This one dirtier. It implied that Hanul Group had foreign influence in executive-level decision-making through the CEO's new wife. It didn't name Judy directly, but it didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who it was about. When Joon-seo read it in the office, he went so still that even Min-ho noticed. That's not random, Min-ho said quietly. No, Joon-seo replied, voice like ice. It's targeted. Judy stood by the window, reading the same article on her phone. She said nothing at first. Then softly, they want me to react. Joon-seo looked at her. Then don't. She lowered the phone. That's easy for you to say. His expression sharpened. What does that mean? She turned fully now, and for the first time since he met her, there was real anger under her calm. It means no one is questioning whether you belong here. Silence. Min-ho's eyes moved between them, reading the room like he always did. Judy took a slow breath, trying to keep her voice steady. No one is calling your presence strategic. No one is asking whether your skin, your accent, your face, your existence in this company is a convenient PR accessory. Joon-seo said nothing. She laughed once, but there was no humor in it. You know what's funny? I knew people would be suspicious. I expected that. But I underestimated how creative rich people can be when they want to humiliate someone politely. The room stayed still. Then Joon-seo said, low and careful, "Why didn't you tell me?" She looked at him like the question itself irritated her. Tell you what? That people are exactly who they've always been. That it was getting to you. That made her pause. Not because the words were dramatic, because they were sincere. And sincerity from him still felt strange. She looked away first. I don't need pity. That's not what I'm offering. His voice was quieter now, more controlled. But there was something else in it too. Something almost personal. Before she could answer, Min-ho's phone rang, slicing through the moment. He checked the screen and cursed under his breath. What? Min-ho looked up. Security flagged an internal archive breach. Joon-seo straightened instantly. What was accessed? Min-ho's face hardened. Old executive records. Legal history. Founder-era holdings. Judy's fingers tightened around her phone. Just slightly. Just enough. Neither man noticed. But if anyone had looked closely, they would have seen it. Because for the first time, something had shaken her too. That night, Joon-seo came home after midnight, exhausted and soaked from the rain. The city outside the penthouse windows glowed in blurred neon. All silver roads and reflected headlights, But inside the apartment, only the kitchen light was on. Judy was there, standing barefoot by the stove in one of his oversized shirts, making tea like she hadn't spent the entire day pretending she was fine. He stopped at the entrance and watched her for a moment. She turned slightly. "You're dripping on the floor." He shut the door behind him. "You're awake. You're observant." He should have gone to his room. Instead, he walked into the kitchen. She reached for another mug without asking and placed it on the counter. He watched her pour hot water into it. "Chamomile?" she asked. He frowned faintly. "How do you know I drink chamomile?" She shrugged. "Your pantry is aggressively organized." That got the smallest breath of a laugh out of him. And there it was again. That dangerous softening. He took the mug from her hand. Their fingers brushed. Both of them felt it. Both of them ignored it. For about 3 seconds. Then he said, "You shouldn't have had to deal with that article alone." She looked at him surprised. He leaned against the counter, still holding the mug. "I should have shut it down faster." Her face changed slightly. Not softer exactly. More exposed. "Why?" she asked. "Because it was bad for the company?" He met her eyes. "No." That one word sat between them like heat. She swallowed. And for the first time she looked almost uncertain. He took a slow breath. "They weren't attacking your credentials. They were trying to humiliate you." Her voice dropped. And I hate bullies." That hit harder than either of them expected. Because it was simple. Honest. Unperformed. She looked away quickly, blinking once as if something in her chest had shifted and she didn't appreciate it. "Careful," she said lightly, trying to recover. "You're starting to sound protective." "I am protective." The words left his mouth before he could stop them. And now there was no taking them back. Her head turned slowly. Their eyes locked. The room went silent except for the rain against the glass. "Of me?" she asked. He didn't answer. Which was answer enough. And just when it felt like the air might physically split between them, his phone buzzed on the counter. The spell broke instantly. He glanced at the screen and his face hardened. "Min-ho." Judy stepped back, masking whatever had almost happened. Joon-seo answered the call. "What is it?" Min-ho's voice came through sharp and urgent. "You need to come in. Now." 30 minutes later, Joon-seo was back at headquarters with Min-ho and the internal security team reviewing footage and access logs. Someone had entered a restricted archive server room after hours. The face was obscured. The timing was precise. And whatever they were looking for, they knew exactly where to find it. Min-ho replayed the footage again, then exhaled slowly. This isn't just corporate espionage anymore. Joon-seo's eyes stayed fixed on the screen. "No. This is personal." And he was right. Because whoever was moving against Hanul wasn't just trying to steal money. They were digging into history, into blood, into secrets buried so deep that only a few people in the company even knew they existed. And one of those people was sleeping in Joon-seo's bed. Well, technically not his bed, but definitely his house. And definitely with more secrets than he realized. The next morning, Judy stood alone in the main lobby of Hanul Group, while staff moved around her in crisp suits and controlled panic. She lifted her gaze toward the towering founder's portrait mounted on the marble wall. A stern man. Legacy eyes. Generational arrogance frozen in oil paint. She stared at it for a second too long, then said under her breath, "You should have buried your lies better. Talking to dead men now?" She turned. Joon-seo stood a few feet away, coffee in hand, looking tired and too observant. She straightened immediately. "Only the ones who still owe people things." His gaze flicked from her face to the portrait, then back again. And for the first time suspicion, real suspicion, moved quietly behind his eyes. "If you think he's starting to notice the cracks, you're right. But trust me, in the next part the romance gets hotter, the spy angle gets uglier, and one accusation is about to blow this marriage wide open." The office was quiet, too quiet, when Joon-seo walked in. Usually, the hum of air conditioning and the distant clack of keyboards masked everything. Today it felt like the building itself was holding its breath. Judy was already there, leaning against a marble pillar near the executive elevator, arms crossed, watching the entrance like she had done it 1,000 times before. "You're early," he said, voice low. I needed to see how deep the rot goes, she replied, eyes sharp. And I like the quiet before chaos. Joon-seo raised an eyebrow. I thought you liked chaos. I like controlled chaos, she corrected. What happened last night wasn't controlled. It was desperation disguised as efficiency. He frowned. You think someone on the inside is behind this? She tilted her head. I know it. That was when Min-ho arrived, tablet in hand, looking more serious than he had ever looked before. We traced the breach, he said. It's not just a server hack. Someone's been moving silently for months, gaining access to everything, from financial reports to legal archives. They know the company's history better than most executives. Judy's lips pressed into a thin line. And they're aiming for the family holdings, not just the current profits. Joon-seo's jaw tightened. That's personal. Someone's trying to destabilize me and my lineage. Exactly, Judy said. And the question is, why now? Joon-seo's phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A message from Dae-hyun. I see you found out about me. Let's talk. Alone. You might not like what you discover. He looked up at Judy. He's getting bold. She smirked faintly. Boldness is a distraction. Don't fall for it. But the seed of doubt had been planted. That evening the gala was in full swing. Every influential figure in Seoul had been invited, and the tension in the room was palpable. Judy glided through the crowd, a vision of elegance and control. People whispered, eyes following her like moths to a flame. But behind the polite smiles and handshakes, every glance contained a question. What is she really planning? Joon-seo stayed close as always. Something in him wanted to guard her, protect her, but the contract in his mind reminded him. 2 years and then she was gone. He didn't like that thought. Across the room, Dae-hyun observed. He was charming, effortlessly magnetic, the kind of man who could smile while plotting your downfall. And tonight he was testing her. Mrs. Han, he said, cornering her at the edge of the terrace. I have to admit, you've been impressive. Judy arched a brow. Impressive at what? Surviving you. He laughed softly. Clever. But I'm more interested in influence. That's why I'm here. You, me, your husband, this company. It's a triangle, whether you like it or not. She smiled faintly. Triangles can be stable. Just depends on the angle. He leaned closer, voice dropping. You have no idea how sharp mine can be. She didn't flinch. I have a good idea. Meanwhile, Min-ho had noticed their interaction and didn't like it. His hands curled slightly at his sides. He wanted to intervene to protect, but he knew Joon-seo's pride would make any interference messy. And that was when the first kidnapping attempt happened. The security team got a call. Judy's car had been followed after the gala. The vehicle was stopped abruptly on a side street. 2 masked figures tried to pull her out. She reacted before anyone could intervene, swift, deliberate, and shockingly precise. She grabbed one of the attackers, spun him into the other, and shattered a bone with a movement so fluid it was almost poetic. By the time the guards arrived, she was standing over the unconscious men, calm, composed, and completely in control. When Joon-seo arrived minutes later, adrenaline pumping, he found her leaning against the car, rain dripping off her hair, the faintest smirk on her lips. They underestimated me, she said simply. They were trying to. He started but stopped. The words died on his tongue as he realized something. She had anticipated this, planned for it, executed perfectly. For the first time, Joon-seo's confidence wavered. Not in her abilities but in his own understanding of her. Judy, he said quietly, you're hiding something. She looked at him, her gaze piercing. You think you're the only one with secrets? And then she smiled. Not the playful smile that had intrigued him at the wedding. Not the mischievous one that unnerved him in their early mornings, but a dangerous, knowing smile, the one that said she was playing a game he didn't fully understand. Later that night, in the penthouse, Joon-seo sat by the window, staring out at the neon-lit city. Judy poured herself tea in silence, moving like a shadow across the kitchen. Who were they? He asked finally. The people who knew about the company's archives, she said. They're not random. Someone wants those holdings. Someone powerful. And they're connected to me. Joon-seo turned sharply. Connected to you? What does that mean? Her back was to him, pouring tea with deliberate care. It means I have my own reasons for being here, Joon-seo. Reasons you'll only understand when it's too late. The tension between them, already thick, turned almost tangible. He wanted answers. She wanted control. And neither of them realized yet that the true battle had already begun. Because while he thought he was protecting the company, she was quietly maneuvering herself to take over it. And while he thought he was in charge of the marriage, she was the one orchestrating every move. The next morning, the media exploded with news of the assault attempt on Judy, framing it as a sign of her courage, strength, and resilience. Shares soared briefly. Joon-seo's competitors whispered in panic. But internally, he knew it was a warning. And he knew Judy was at the center of it. Why didn't you call me? He asked her sharply when he finally confronted her in the private elevator. Because it was my problem to handle, she replied smoothly. And because I wanted to see how you would react. Joon-seo stared at her. He should have been angry, but instead he felt something else, something unfamiliar. Fear, respect, and begrudgingly admiration. Judy smiled faintly, as if she could read his thoughts. You should be more careful who you trust in this city, Joon-seo. Not everyone who smiles is your friend. Not everyone who bows is loyal. And not everyone who kisses your hand truly loves you. He froze. The elevator dinged. And the doors opened. Outside, Min-ho was waiting, his face grave. We found out who's behind the leaks, he said, voice low. But you're not going to like it. Judy's eyes flickered just for a moment. A shadow of something dangerous. Tell me, Joon-seo said, his voice steady but tense. Min-ho swallowed. It's someone close. Someone trusted. And they're still in play. The room seemed to tighten. The city outside buzzed obliviously. And for a moment all three of them realized they were in the middle of a game bigger than any of them had imagined. Someone was playing everyone. And no one could be sure who would survive. If you're still watching, like and subscribe because things are about to get explosive. You won't believe who's truly pulling the strings. Joon-seo's office was tense, silent except for the low hum of the server and the faint tapping of Min-ho's fingers against the desk. Judy stood by the window, arms folded, the rain streaking the glass behind her, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Min-ho leaned over the tablet, scrolling through security footage. It's precise. Calculated. Whoever did this knew exactly what files to access and how to cover their tracks. They're ghosts. Joon-seo rubbed his temples. And you're telling me these ghosts are connected to Judy? She turned slowly, expression neutral. Not me personally, but to my past, to my family, to a claim they want enforced. And I have to admit, it complicates things. Min-ho looked up sharply. Complicates things how? Let's just say, she began, voice low, I'm not as naive as everyone thinks. That attack last night, it wasn't random. It was a test. Joon-seo's brow furrowed. A test? By whom? By the people who believe they have a right to Hanul Group. And by people who think they can manipulate me. She paused. And perhaps a little test for you too. Joon-seo's jaw tightened. You're not helping. She smiled faintly. You love it more than you'll admit. The tension in the room was thick, but it was the kind of tension that promised storm clouds. One wrong move and the entire city would feel the thunder. The next day, Judy arrived at the Hanul Group headquarters, and the atmosphere was electric. Staff were buzzing, security teams were on edge, and rumors were flying. Joon-seo followed her, silent, observing every movement. A sudden alarm rang. One of the executive servers had been accessed again. Min-ho dashed into the room. We've got activity in the financial archives. It's someone with deep knowledge of the company's operations. Joon-seo clenched his fists. Time to find out who's really behind this. Judy tilted her head, her expression unreadable. Careful. If they know you're looking, they'll adapt. You're dealing with a strategist. And you're? Joon-seo's voice was sharp. I'm the woman who knows how to play the game better than anyone else in this room. She didn't blink. Including you. The words hit him like a thunderclap. The hunt intensified. For days, Joon-seo and Min-ho traced digital footprints, interviewed staff, and monitored every possible lead. Meanwhile, Judy stayed steps ahead, giving cryptic hints, subtly directing investigations, but never revealing too much. Then came the first confrontation. In a dimly lit parking garage, Joon-seo and Min-ho cornered a junior executive who had been seen leaving the restricted archives late at night. The man was sweating, stammering. "They made me do it," he gasped. It's not me, it's she." Joon-seo froze. "She who?" Judy's voice cut through the darkness, calm and poised. "Careful, Joon-seo. You're asking the wrong question." He turned sharply. "Judy, what do you know?" Her eyes gleamed with an unsettling clarity. "I know everything you think you understand about loyalty, betrayal, and inheritance is wrong. And I've been waiting for the right moment to show you." The executive trembled. I was following orders. From Dae-hyun." Joon-seo's stomach dropped. "Dae-hyun." "Of course," Judy said, stepping closer. "The charming rival, the friendly face in your boardroom. The man everyone trusts. He's been orchestrating this from the start." Min-ho shook his head in disbelief. "We didn't see it coming." Judy smiled faintly. "Neither did you. But now you know. And knowing is power." Joon-seo's mind raced. He had been blindsided. Every move, every threat, every leak. Carefully controlled by Dae-hyun and subtly facilitated by Judy's knowledge of both the company and its rivals. The realization hit him like ice water. The woman he thought he was protecting, the woman he had begun to respect, maybe even care for, was 2 steps ahead of him at all times. "And you?" he said slowly, his voice dangerous. "You knew." She nodded once. "I did. But I didn't act. I waited for the perfect moment to claim what's rightfully mine. Hanul Group isn't just a company. It's my legacy too. And if I play my cards well, I won't just survive this. I'll control it." Joon-seo felt a surge of emotions he hadn't anticipated. Betrayal, awe, frustration, desire. Judy took a step closer, lowering her voice. "You may have a contract with me, Han Joon-seo, but contracts don't define power. Strategy does. And right now, I am the strategist." Before he could respond, Min-ho interrupted, voice urgent. "They've moved. Dae-hyun is planning something big. He's targeting you both. Financially and personally." Judy's eyes flickered, sharp and calculating. "Then we must act first. Timing is everything." Joon-seo clenched his jaw. "I trusted you." "You still can," she said, stepping closer. "But you must let me lead. You'll thank me when the storm passes." The room felt charged, each second like lightning about to strike. Minutes later, a call came in. Judy's private vehicle had been tailed again. This time the threat was clear: kidnapping. Joon-seo's heart pounded as he grabbed his coat. "They'll never touch her." Judy smiled faintly, calm as ever. "They already tried, remember? And they failed. Let me handle this. Trust me. For once." He hesitated, torn between protecting her and letting her play the hand she clearly had already mastered. And then she walked out the door, poised, elegant, untouchable. Within minutes, chaos erupted on the streets. Cars swerved, tires squealed, and masked figures tried to corner her again. But this time Judy was ready. Every move calculated, every escape planned, every strike precise. She turned the would-be attackers against each other, leaving them incapacitated in the middle of the street, before slipping into a shadowed alley and disappearing. Joon-seo and Min-ho arrived moments later, breathless, stunned, and unsure how she had done it. She's unbelievable," Min-ho muttered. Joon-seo said nothing, only staring at the darkened alley where she had vanished. And for the first time he understood the truth. Judy wasn't just his wife, his partner, or a strategist. She was a force of nature, one that he had underestimated, and one that could very well change everything. If you're still glued to the screen, hit like and comment your thoughts. What do you think will happen next? Night fell over Seoul like a black velvet curtain, the city lights glowing faintly through the mist. Joon-seo sat in the penthouse, his suit loosened, sleeves rolled up, eyes fixed on the city below. He had never felt so powerless. Min-ho sat across from him, tablet open, tracking every movement in real time. She's not just fighting them, she's orchestrating countermeasures. Every step calculated. Every escape anticipated. Joon-seo gritted his teeth. "And Dae-hyun?" Min-ho shook his head. "He's patient. Too patient. He knows she's capable. That's why he's escalating slowly. But," his voice dropped, "he's not expecting her to fight back this way." Outside, Judy navigated the maze of backstreets with precision. Her movements were fluid, almost choreographed, like a predator moving among prey unaware of their fate. The masked figures chasing her were fast, strong, but predictable. She turned a corner, disappeared down a flight of stairs, and slipped into a service tunnel. Her phone vibrated. One message from Joon-seo. "Stop. Come back. Now." She smiled faintly. "He thinks he can protect me. How cute." She sent a reply. "Relax. I've got this." Her fingers lingered over the screen before tossing the phone into her bag. She was in control. Always. Meanwhile, back at Hanul Group headquarters, Joon-seo's phone rang. It was Dae-hyun. "I see you're finally realizing the game," the rival's voice purred. "Didn't expect her to be so capable, did you?" Joon-seo slammed his hand onto the desk. "What do you want, Dae-hyun?" "You," Dae-hyun said smoothly. "And her. Both of you. The company, the legacy, it's all a board game to me. And I plan to win." Joon-seo's pulse raced. "If you touch her, I swear." "You won't," Dae-hyun interrupted. "Because she's entertaining." The words chilled Joon-seo. Dae-hyun's fascination wasn't admiration, it was calculation. An obsession. Meanwhile, Judy had reached her target. A high-rise building linked to Dae-hyun's network. She moved through shadows, silent and unseen, hacking security doors, bypassing cameras, leaving no trace. Inside, she discovered a trove of documents, proof of Dae-hyun's schemes, embezzlement, and the network of sabotage that had been destabilizing Hanul Group. She smirked. Everything was coming together. But as she turned to leave, a hand grabbed her shoulder. She spun around, ready to strike, but froze. Dae-hyun stood there, calm, confident, almost unnervingly composed. "Impressive," he said. "You're better than I expected." Judy's eyes narrowed. "You're predictable. And you're dangerous," he said with a slight smile. "Which is why I like you." Her pulse didn't skip, but the moment was electric. Two predators recognizing each other. She smirked. "Like me? Be careful. Admiration can be fatal." Dae-hyun stepped closer. "Then let's see who survives." At the same time, Joon-seo, alerted by Min-ho, arrived on the building's perimeter. He saw Judy and Dae-hyun, too close for comfort. His chest tightened. "Don't," he whispered. And yet he had no idea how deep the danger went. Inside, Judy played her final card. With a swift move, she locked Dae-hyun in the server room, activating security overrides. "You underestimated me," she said coldly. "Always a mistake." Outside, Joon-seo burst in, adrenaline surging. "Are you okay?" he demanded. She turned calm, composed, victorious. "Better than okay. They'll think twice before targeting me again." Min-ho arrived moments later, shaking his head in disbelief. "She did all of this alone?" Joon-seo looked at her differently now. Not just as a wife, but as a force, as someone untouchable, unrelenting, and brilliant. Dae-hyun, his rival, was left stunned, outplayed, his plans dismantled, his confidence shattered. But the revelation of Judy's true identity, the strategist, the rightful heir, the untouchable force, left Joon-seo and everyone who had doubted her breathless and reeling. As the city skyline glittered through the high-rise windows, Judy looked at Joon-seo. "You wanted control, power, protection. I've shown you something else. Strategy, patience, and inevitability." Joon-seo's voice was low, almost reverent. "You're unstoppable." She smirked faintly. "I know." The three of them stood in silence, the storm of the past days settling into a tense calm. But beneath it all, something remained unspoken. The contract, the looming divorce, the secrets, all of it waiting just beneath the surface. And the next move, that would change everything. Joon-seo paced. "She didn't just handle Dae-hyun," he muttered, voice tense. "She was everywhere at once. Calculating, controlling. Nothing escaped her." Min-ho leaned against the desk. "I've never seen someone operate like that. Not even in the intelligence files I've reviewed. She's a tactician, Joon-seo. Not just clever, precise." Joon-seo stopped pacing, hands clenching. "And I thought I was supposed to be in charge of this company, my marriage, my life." "Ah," Min-ho said dryly. "Welcome to the reality of being outplayed by your spouse." Joon-seo shot him a look, but he didn't argue. because he knew it was true. Meanwhile, Judy was in her own penthouse office, scanning through files she had retrieved from Daehyun's network. Names, dates, accounts, every shred of sabotage, every strategic move documented. She smiled faintly, a flash of satisfaction. She picked up her phone and typed a single message. Time to reclaim what's mine. Back at Hanul Group, Daehyun was reeling. Locked out of his own operation, he paced his office, trying to make sense of what had just happened. For the first time he realized he had been used, not as the victor but as the pawn. Across the city, Joon-seo watched Judy's movements through the security updates Minho had managed to capture. His chest tightened as he realized how much she had accomplished while he had been fighting fire she'd anticipated all along. "She's unstoppable," he said quietly. "Yes," Minho agreed. "But unstoppable isn't invincible. And now she has leverage. Both over Daehyun and the company." Joon-seo's phone buzzed. A message from Judy. "Meet me at the original founder's suite. Midnight. Alone." He hesitated, reading it twice. Then, like a man stepping into a storm he can't avoid, he left. The suite was dark, silent except for the faint hum of city lights through floor-to-ceiling windows. Judy was there, waiting, her expression unreadable. "You know why I called you," she said softly. "Yes," he replied. "You want control." She tilted her head, a faint smile forming. "Not just control. Justice. Reclaiming what was always mine. But there's a price for that." He frowned. "And what price is that?" Her eyes glinted. 2 years. That's our contract. But within those 2 years I hold all the cards. Every move, every decision, this company answers to me whether you like it or not. And you?" She paused, stepping closer. "You answer to me in ways you haven't even realized." Joon-seo's chest tightened. He knew her strategy was flawless, her patience unmatched. But something deeper stirred inside him. A mix of admiration, fear, desire, and respect. "You've been playing me," he said softly. "Not playing," she corrected. "Teaching. Guiding. And sometimes, letting you learn the hard way." He swallowed, trying to steady himself. "And Daehyun." Judy's smile was lethal. "A lesson. One he'll never forget." Outside, the city slept unaware. But inside the penthouse suite, the balance of power had shifted. One woman, one calculated mind, had turned the entire game on its head. Joon-seo for the first time understood. The woman he had married for convenience, for strategy, had become the most dangerous, brilliant force in his life, and perhaps the only one capable of saving Hanul Group from total destruction. He looked at her, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Admiration, respect, and something else, something unspoken, simmering beneath the surface. Judy turned away, walking toward the window. "Remember this, Han Joon-seo. The real game has just begun. And I always win." He stepped closer, voice low, urgent. "Then let me fight by your side." She didn't turn, but her words carried a promise. "You can try. But the strategy is mine." Faux threats, schemes, and secrets yet to be revealed. Inside, 2 warriors bound by a contract, a marriage, and a web of power stood on the precipice of a battle that would determine not just the company, but their lives, their loyalty, and their hearts. The next move could come from anyone, the spy, the rival, or even someone closer than they realized. And when it did, nothing would be the same. In the quiet that followed, Judy looked out over the city, her mind already calculating the next move, anticipating the next threat, preparing for any who would challenge her reign. Joon-seo joined her at the window. "So what now?" She turned, a small smile playing on her lips. "Now we rebuild. Stronger. Smarter. Together. And anyone who tries to stand in our way." She let the sentence hang, dangerous and promising. "We'll regret it," Joon-seo finished for her. "Yes," she agreed, her eyes glinting with triumph. "Because I always win." The camera of fate zoomed out, showing the city skyline, glittering, chaotic, yet subdued by the invisible hand of a woman who had mastered the art of strategy, loyalty, and power. And for Joon-seo, the lesson was clear. In a world of betrayal and ambition, the one you underestimate most is often the one who holds all the cards. The warehouse lights came on one by one, not all at once. 1, 2, 3. Like someone was waking the room up slowly just to make sure fear had time to breathe. Joon-seo stood frozen in the middle of the concrete floor. Chest rising hard, eyes darting across rusted beams, stacked crates, oil stains and shadows too deep to trust. The place smelled like metal, old rain and something staged. Something wrong. A few feet away, Judy sat tied to a steel chair beneath a single hanging bulb, her head lowered, hair partly covering her face, wrists bound, mouth slightly parted like she'd run out of strength fighting. For one awful second he believed it. He believed she was really hurt. Believed he had gotten there too late. Believed that every fear he had spent the last few weeks refusing to name had finally taken shape. Then a voice came from the dark. "Wow," Dae-hyun said, stepping into the light with a slow clap and an amused smile. "You actually came alone. That's either romantic or catastrophically stupid." Joon-seo's entire body went rigid. Dae-hyun looked annoyingly calm. No dramatic villain speech. No heavy breathing. No rage. Just that same infuriating polished charm. Like he'd wandered into the wrong party and decided to enjoy himself anyway. "You touch her," Joon-seo said, voice low and deadly, "and I will bury you." Dae-hyun's brows rose. "See, this is why I almost like you." Almost. Then armed private security stepped out of the shadows. One after another. Black suits. Earpieces. Weapons drawn. Professional. Controlled. And not one of them was aiming at Dae-hyun. They were all aiming at Joon-seo. His eyes flicked sharply from face to face. Then to Dae-hyun. Then to Judy. Then back again. No one moved. No one spoke. Until Judy lifted her head. Slowly. Calmly. And everything about her changed. The trembling was gone. The fear was gone. The softness she had worn like silk over a blade disappeared right in front of him. She straightened in the chair, rolling her shoulders once like the performance had become uncomfortable. Then she looked at him. Not apologetically. Not tenderly. Just clearly. Coldly. Like this was the first time he was seeing her without permission. "Thank you for coming, husband." The line hit him like a physical blow. His face didn't change at first. That was the worst part. He just stared. Like his brain had stopped cooperating with reality. "What?" he said, but even his voice sounded distant to his own ears. "What is this?" Judy lowered her hands to her lap, then peeled off the restraints. Just like that. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Deliberate. She placed the fake zip ties on the floor beside her heel, stood up, and smoothed the front of her black dress like she was arriving at a meeting she had no intention of being late for. "This," she said, her gaze never leaving his, "is the first honest night of our marriage." No music could have saved that moment. No sound design could have improved it. Because the silence after that line was louder than anything else. Joon-seo's eyes darkened. He looked between her and Dae-hyun, who was now standing far too comfortably beside her, hands in his pockets, watching the emotional wreckage unfold like a man with front row tickets. And that was exactly what it looked like. It looked like betrayal. It looked like conspiracy. It looked like they had been laughing at him together. Joon-seo's jaw flexed hard enough to hurt. "You were working with him?" Judy didn't blink. "I was using him." Dae-hyun let out a laugh. "That part is true." Joon-seo turned to him with enough hatred in his eyes to strip paint, then back to her. And what made it worse, what made it unbearable, was that she wasn't panicking. She wasn't trying to explain herself. She wasn't begging to be understood. She looked prepared, as if she had rehearsed this exact pain and accepted it as necessary collateral. That made him want to break something. "What did you do?" he asked, voice quieter now. "More dangerous. What exactly did you do?" Judy held his gaze. Not everything. Just enough. That was how she chose to destroy him. "My grandfather," she said, "helped build the earliest version of Hanul with your grandfather." Joon-seo said nothing. Dae-hyun didn't interrupt. Even the guards seemed to understand that whatever was happening now mattered more than guns. "When the company was still small," Judy continued, "when it was just paper files, borrowed offices, and men pretending ambition made them honorable, they built it together. Equal contribution. Equal risk. Equal ownership." Her voice remained calm. Too calm. But when the company started becoming valuable, the paperwork changed. Shares were shifted. Records disappeared. Signatures appeared where they shouldn't have. Your family's branch expanded. Mine was erased. Joon-seo frowned, but only faintly, because part of him was still trying to catch up to the fact that his wife had just stood up from a fake kidnapping and become a stranger in front of him. Judy took a step closer. My mother spent years trying to prove what happened. Years fighting people with better lawyers, better names, better access. She died with boxes of documents and not enough money to keep fighting. Now there was something in her voice. Not tears. Not softness. Just old fury polished into control. I didn't grow up hearing bedtime stories, Joon-seo. I grew up hearing fragments. Whispers. Half-burned truths. Enough to know one thing for certain. She looked him dead in the eye. The empire you inherited may have been built on theft. That landed hard. Because unlike the emotional betrayal, this one didn't feel theatrical. Felt possible. Worse than possible. Felt plausible. And that's what made it dangerous. Joon-seo's expression changed. Not acceptance. Not yet. But something cracked. Something uncertain. Judy saw it. Still she didn't stop. I didn't come to Seoul for love, she said. I came for recovery. Dae-hyun tilted his head, clearly enjoying the way every sentence landed like another knife. I entered your world because the front door was locked to people like me, she continued. Marriage gave me what lawsuits couldn't. Legal access, board proximity, inheritance pathways, influence from the inside. Her eyes stayed on his. Your name opened rooms I could never enter alone. He looked sick now. Not physically. Soul deep. Like something essential inside him was being peeled back in public. Every soft memory between them, every late night, every breakfast, every hand brush, every almost confession, was suddenly standing in a line waiting to be executed. And then she did the cruelest part. She made him ask, was any of it real? The question came out barely above a whisper. Not because he was weak. Because that was the only volume heartbreak knows how to use when it stops pretending to be anger. Judy froze. Only for a second. But it was there. A hesitation so small most people would miss it. But not an audience. And not Dae-hyun. And not anyone who had ever loved badly enough to recognize when someone was lying to survive. She looked at him. Then away. Then back again. And when she finally answered, her voice was flat. That stopped matching the day I signed the contract. It was a lie. Terrible one. A visible one. But Joon-seo didn't see it. Not then. Because pain has a way of making lies look clean. He looked shattered. Then he looked furious. Then he looked like a man one bad sentence away from becoming dangerous. You should have just killed me. Judy met his gaze without flinching. Not yet. Dae-hyun actually winced. Not from pity. From appreciation. That, he muttered under his breath, was vicious. Joon-seo lunged. Not at her. At Dae-hyun. Because if he touched her right then, he wasn't sure whether he'd shake her or hold her. And both possibilities made him hate himself. But he never reached him. Security intercepted instantly, arms locking around his shoulders and waist, dragging him back with brutal efficiency. Get off me, he roared, struggling hard enough to knock one of them sideways. Dae-hyun wiped a split at the corner of his lip where Joon-seo's fist had barely clipped him and laughed softly. Then he said the one thing that changed the entire room. You're looking at the wrong enemy. Joon-seo stopped fighting just enough to glare at him. Dae-hyun adjusted his cuff, blood on his thumb, expression unreadable. You still think I'm the one trying to destroy you, he said. That's cute. Silence. Then he tilted his head toward Amara. Your wife may have planned the marriage, he said, voice smooth now, stripped of mockery. But your company's collapse? Your leaks? Your spy. He smiled. That wasn't her. Everything in the room shifted. Joon-seo turned sharply. Not just to Dae-hyun. To Judy. Because she had gone still. Too still. And for the first time since the lights came on, she looked surprised. Not fake surprised. Not strategic surprised. Real. Flicker. Small. But enough. Which meant one thing. She hadn't known that part either. And that was when the darkness behind the stacked crates moved. A figure stepped forward. Hands in his pockets. Posture relaxed. Expression calm. No dramatic entrance. No shouting. No wild-eyed villain performance. Just disappointment. Like a man tired of pretending to be decent in a room full of people who mistook usefulness for loyalty. Kang Min-ho. Joon-seo stared at him. Actually stared. Because his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing. Min-ho. His closest friend. His fixer. His right hand. The man who had stood beside him through every board fight, every late night, every emergency, every disaster, every laugh. Min-ho gave him a faint smile. Not cruel. That would have been easier. Just resigned. You really should stop trusting people, he said. Just because they make you laugh. And that was the moment everything broke. Joon-seo looked like someone had ripped the floor out from under him and expected him to keep standing. Min-ho? He said, and it wasn't even anger yet. It was disbelief. No. Min-ho exhaled softly, almost tired. That, he said, is exactly why this was so easy. Judy's eyes narrowed, recalculating everything at once. Dae-hyun folded his arms and leaned against a crate like this had somehow become his favorite episode of other people's misery. Min-ho stepped forward into the light, his face composed, voice even. He did not look guilty. That was what made him frightening. He looked justified. I grew up watching men like you inherit rooms I had to earn my way into, he said to Joon-seo. Same schools, same meetings, same sleepless nights. But when the future was being assigned, blood won. Again. Joon-seo's voice hardened. So you sabotaged my company? No, Min-ho said coolly. I exposed how weak it already was. His eyes flicked briefly to Judy. And when she walked in carrying revenge in a designer coat, I realized something beautiful. Judy's jaw tightened. She was the perfect distraction. He started pacing now, slow and measured, like a man finally done hiding his real face. I amplified the leaks. I planted the spy. I fed Dae-hyun just enough information to keep him useful and stupid. I manipulated the board, redirected internal panic, and watched both of you waste weeks blaming each other while I positioned myself to inherit the fallout. Dae-hyun let out a dry laugh. Wow. Useful and stupid is rude, but not inaccurate. Min-ho ignored him. I wasn't trying to beat the system, he said. I was trying to replace it. He looked at Joon-seo again. You wanted loyalty. She wanted justice. I wanted results. Guess who came closest? No one answered. Because the ugliest part was, he almost had. He didn't see himself as evil. He saw himself as the only honest man in the room. That was what made him lethal. Min-ho nodded toward the steel shutters now locking the warehouse exits. By tomorrow morning, the emergency board session will begin. Joon-seo will look unstable. Judy will look like a hostile infiltrator. Dae-hyun will look compromised. And I will look like the only adult left standing. Then he smiled faintly. You're welcome. He turned to leave. Joon-seo lunged again, but security restrained him hard. MNHO. Min-ho paused without turning back. The kidnapping setup was necessary, he said. Pain reveals character faster than pressure ever will. Then he finally looked over his shoulder. I needed both of you broken before the market opened. And then he walked out. The metal doors slammed shut behind him. Silence. Heavy. Humiliating. Breathless. Then Dae-hyun muttered. I told both of you this man smiled too much. And somehow stupidly that almost made it worse. Because now they were trapped in a warehouse with a former enemy. Armed guards outside, a collapsing company, and enough betrayal in the air to choke on. Joon-seo turned on Judy first. Of course he did. You used me. She snapped back instantly. Your family stole from mine. You married me under false pretenses. You married me like I was a business asset. His chest rose sharply. I never lied about what this marriage was. No, she fired back. You just made sure it never had to become anything else. That landed hard. Dae-hyun quietly stepped away, deciding with great wisdom that this was no longer his scene. Joon-seo stared at her, rage and grief warring in his face. I would have helped you, he said, voice cracking despite himself. If you had just told me. Judy laughed once, bitter and ugly. Men like you always say that after the damage is done. His expression changed. Not louder. Worse. Was I ever just a target to you? And that That was the question. The one the whole story had been bleeding toward. Judy opened her mouth, closed it, looked away, and the silence answered before she could. Joon-seo looked gutted. Then she said it. Softly, painfully. You were supposed to be. He didn't move. But everything in him broke a little more. Because those 4 words meant something had changed. And that somehow hurt more than if she had simply said no. Dae-hyun cleared his throat. I hate to interrupt this award-winning emotional collapse, but if Minho gets to that board before you do, your lives become a footnote. Judy turned sharply. Can you get us out? He gave her a smug look. I'm offended you even had to ask. 10 minutes later, after a hack side gate, 1 disarmed guard, and a truly unnecessary amount of smugness from Dae-hyun, they were speeding toward Hanul headquarters in separate cars with less than an hour before the emergency session. By the time Joon-seo and Judy burst into the boardroom, Minho was already speaking. And worst of all, it was working. He stood at the head of the table, polished and composed, with a screen behind him displaying stock volatility, legal concerns, and carefully framed internal communications. And under these circumstances, he was saying smoothly, I believe it would be irresponsible to leave Hanul in the hands of a CEO currently compromised by emotional instability and marital fraud. Several board members nodded. Joon-seo froze in the doorway. Minho didn't even flinch. He simply looked at him and smiled like he had expected the interruption. And, Minho continued, turning toward the room, Mrs. Han's infiltration of this company through a contract marriage presents a serious governance threat. The room erupted in whispers. Judy stood still. Very still. Because this was it. Her moment. She still had a path. If she exposed the founder-heir inheritance issue now, she could trigger a transfer battle, a legal freeze, and possibly force partial control. She could still take what she came for. But if she did, Minho would still win the chaos. And for the first time in this entire story, she chose differently. She stepped forward. I did enter this marriage with an agenda. The room snapped silent. Joon-seo turned to look at her, pain flashing across his face like a fresh wound reopening. She kept going. I wanted leverage, access, positioning. I hated what Hanul represented, and I believed I had the right to dismantle it from within. Shock moved across the room like electricity. Then she turned, not to Joon-seo, to Minho. But unlike you, she said, voice razor steady, I still know where to stop. That line hit. Because that was the line between revenge and rot. Minho's smile thinned. Then Judy placed a flash drive on the table. I also know better than to trust every smiling man in a suit. Minho's eyes changed. Just slightly. That was enough. Judy nodded toward the screen technician. Play file 7. The room filled with a voice recording. Minho's voice. Clear. Calm. Discussing planted leaks, manipulated board pressure, timed panic, and using the wife and the heir to collapse each other emotionally. Then came the financial trail. Then the server log. Then the hidden security backup he had never known existed. Because if Judy had been smart enough to infiltrate a dynasty, she had been smart enough not to trust everyone inside it. Minho finally stopped smiling. And somehow that was the most terrifying expression he had worn all morning. He looked at her low and furious. You should have stayed angry. Angry people are easier to predict. Judy didn't blink. You should have stayed useful. The room broke. Board members shouting. Legal counsel standing. Phones buzzing. One director nearly knocking over his chair trying to distance himself from the blast radius. Then, as the founder-era documents surfaced and legal teams began reviewing the original share structures, the final truth came out. And it shattered the last clean line between hero and villain. Joon-seo himself had never been the thief. He had inherited a lie. The original wrongdoing had happened a generation before him, which meant Judy had aimed her revenge at the wrong man. She felt it instantly, like a blade turning inward, because now she had to face the ugliest truth of all. She had become the kind of damage that destroyed her own family. She had used someone who hadn't personally wronged her to punish dead guilt. And that realization broke something in her far more deeply than exposure ever could. Minho, desperate now, attempted one final move, triggering a cued leak to collapse the market anyway. But Dae-hyun, leaning casually near the back like chaos had personally invited him, lifted a hand. "Oh, I blocked that 15 minutes ago," he said. "I keep blackmail files on everyone. For entertainment." No one even had time to react to how insane that sentence was. Security entered. Min-ho was cornered, legally finished. And as they pulled him away, he looked at Joon-seo one last time. Not afraid. Not sorry. Just certain. "You still think love saved you," he said quietly. "That's why men like me always come back." Then he was gone. And after all of that, after the scandal containment, the legal triage, the board reconstruction, the press strategy, the silence, came the hardest part. The quiet. A few days later, Judy stood in the penthouse bedroom packing her suitcase. No dramatic tears. No music. Just zippers, folded clothes, and the unbearable weight of things that used to mean nothing and now meant too much. Joon-seo walked in. Saw the suitcase. Stopped. "You're leaving." She didn't turn around. That was always the deal. "No," he said quietly. "That was the contract." That distinction sat between them. She finally faced him. No armor now. No performance. Just exhaustion. He looked at her for a long moment before asking the question that had haunted every room they'd ever stood in together. "Did you ever love me?" This time she didn't run from it. "Yes." Just that. Simple. Clean. Devastating. He swallowed hard. "When?" And she gave him the line that closed the wound by cutting it open one last time. "When it became too late to stop hurting you." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "I can't pretend none of this happened." She nodded. "I know. But I also can't pretend you were wrong about everything." Her breath caught. He walked to the table and placed a folder down between them. She looked at it. Revised board documents. A restored trust. A legitimate seat. Not as wife. Not as enemy. As rightful stakeholder. She stared at him, stunned. "Why?" And he answered with the kind of truth that only pain can teach. "Because I'd rather lose half the empire than become the kind of man who deserves what you did to me." That was it. That was the thing she never planned for. Justice without manipulation. Restoration without war. And it broke her more than cruelty ever could. Her eyes filled just barely. He stepped closer. Not enough to hold her. Just enough to let the grief stand between them honestly. Their foreheads touched. Nothing more. And it was somehow more intimate than a kiss could have been. Then he said softly, "If there's ever anything between us again, it won't be on paper." Months later, Hanul stood under a new era. Rebuilt. Scarred. Cleaner than before. Judy returned through the front doors this time. Not as Mrs. Han, not in secret, not through side access and legal loopholes. As a rightful stakeholder. As herself. Joon-seo saw her from across the lobby. No contract. No lie. No safety net. Just possibility. And from the mezzanine above, Dae-hyun leaned toward another executive and said dryly, "If they get back together, the rest of us are doomed." For the first time in the entire story. Before she even reached him, Joon-seo laughed. Then she looked up. And they both understood each other. She entered his life to take everything. She left him with the truth. And somehow, that was the one thing neither of them survived unchanged. If this betrayal caught you off guard, like this video, subscribe for more stories with twists that actually earn the shock, and tell me in the comments, would you forgive Amara? Or was what she did unforgivable?